All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Watch This with Rick Ramos. As always, I am your host, Rick Ramos, and here it is, Tuesday, October 31st, 2023. It is Halloween. I am recording this episode. Ibrahim and I have been busting our asses trying to put together a series of, well, we do what we do. We come into this thing with ideas about the movie that we want to talk about, the movies that either have gotten under our skin or, sit in our psyche, films that have a certain hold on the public consciousness, whether it be classics or going back to films that have a hold on our youth but are no longer artistically viable, such as like a couple of weeks ago when we did the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But then the week after that, the episode that is being released today, Rob Reiner and Stephen King's Misery, a film that we went back to and both fell in love with again. I think me a little bit more than him, but I can't speak to him. And as of right now, he is not with me. He is not with me at this moment because we are prepping for something else. And I have some storage space left on this month's Libsyn account. So, that being said, I wanted to sit down and talk about some of the films that we're going to be going into in November. Mr. Chavez and I have decided that we're going to curate a month for each of us. My birthday month is November 3rd. I'll be turning 49. And with that, I wanted to consider some of the films that have influenced me, but we haven't really had a chance to talk about some of the films. Some of these are films that I've wanted to talk about for some time. Akira Kurosawa's High and Low with Toshio Mifune and Tatsuya Nakadai. Sean Penn's third directorial effort, The Pledge, with a wonderful Jack Nicholson, Robin Wright Penn, Sam Shepard, Aaron Eckhart. I believe, I can't remember if Harry Dean Stanton is in that. He might be. But also a wonderful performance by Mickey Rourke in just a 3-4 minute cameo that is just blows you out. I can't wait to sit down and talk about that film and that scene in particular. It's going to be fun to go back to that. We're going to be talking the new Scorsese film Killers of the Flower Moon, an episode that we recorded earlier last week that will be dropping. Well, it'll be the first episode after this episode, so we're going to be dropping that on Sunday or Monday. So this episode is going to drop on my birthday, November 3rd, Friday, and then on Sunday, Monday, we'll be dropping Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, so you'll get to hear our opinion on DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro in a return to the greatness that he exhibited earlier on in his career and has found a lot of audiences have found lacking in his recent performances. But there's an ember of beauty. There's moments of realizing that there's still true art and the possibility of art in the cinema. So with that being said, I wanted to sit down and talk a little bit about what the month is going to be. So, of course, we're going to start with Killers of the Flower Moon, move into the Sean Penn directed The Pledge, Kurosawa's High and Low, closing out the month with two films that really hit me when I was a young man, a kid really, and lit this fire in me of performing. And although I'm no longer performing, and I've had to take a night job that restricts those kinds of freedoms. There is something about that first love that you want to go back to and you want to talk about. So I'm going to we're going to be closing out November with Richard Pryor live in concert and Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip, two films that I think are probably the greatest showcase of an individual performer's talent. And we'll get into that on that episode. But today, I wanted to talk a little bit about getting older. I wanted to talk a little bit about the movies that really kind of started this fascination with cinema. Of course, in my youth, it was the discovery of Robert De Niro in Martin Brest's 1988 Midnight Run with Charles Grodin, Dennis Farina, Joe Pantoliano, and Yaphet Kotto. That was a film that really that sparked this interest in me, and it led me into a direction that helped me discover the earlier De Niro films. That was 88. I would go back to 73, 74 with, actually 76 with Taxi Driver, then back to like 73, 74 with Mean Streets, into Godfather 2, Godfather 2, Raging Bull, and then you found these weird little detours with The King of Comedy, New York, films that at 15, 16 years old I wasn't really prepared for the mature drama, the depth of the drama, and where Martin Scorsese was taking you. So it's been really interesting to take this ride following Scorsese's career from Mean Streets all the way up until his most recent Killers of the Flower Moon. I have not seen Boxcar Bertha, and I haven't seen Who's That Knocking at My Door, but maybe that's a project for the next 2 days that I have off of work. The fact of the matter is that film has been, anybody who listens to this show, anybody who listens to what I do and Ibrahim and I talk about, our feelings, we're very different in our handling of, in our absorption, I guess, of cinema. He looks at it from a more scholarly, I think, and this is my assessment, he looks at it from a more scholarly examination, and I'm both scholarly but emotional, and I think that's the drive that makes film so important to me. It's probably it's the thing that I care about the most. It's the thing that great stories, great storytelling, beautiful narrative, and incredible performance coupled with beautiful camera work and set design is something that really resonates. It's something that taps into the psyche and the soul and helps you. I think it brings us together in a better way. And you can do that with literature and you can do it with music. But there's something about the hero aspect. There's something about identifying. There's something about seeing somebody on the screen and absorbing what they're trying to portray. The actor, the performance, the creation of a character, the inhabitation of a character, living in that world, creating a believable performance that, when I say believable, you can fully and wholeheartedly sell out to in the context of the story that's being told, whether it's a film noir, a western, a horror film. As dismissive as I have been about a lot of horror, I can go back to the early days, and when you look at those, I think, as dated as the Universal films are, the Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, as dated as so many of these films are, there's a soulfulness in the performances of Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, Boris Karloff as both Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, but especially Lon Chaney Jr. as Larry Talbot. both Larry Talbot and the Wolfman, because I look at them as two different characters in the same story. It's two aspects of the same character, but there's a soulfulness there when he goes from Larry Talbot and the moon transforms him into the Wolfman. There is a definite animalistic, which is obvious. There's a different animalistic aspect to the performance, but there's a soulfulness there that, in his creation of the character of Talbot, it seeps through his performance as the Wolfman. It remains there. There's a beauty to it. There's a life there. There's an understanding of the sadness. And as the films continued with, the myriad sequels, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman, or Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, Lon Chaney Jr. never cheated the character. He always imbued it with a humanity that was palpable. And so, however ridiculous the idea of a story might be, that film still continues to have the power that it once did. And it's not laughable in any way. I mean, when you watch Dracula, Ibrahim and I have talked about this when he went to see Dracula playing at the Ace Theater in Los Angeles when I was working valet at that point. He told me about how disgusted he was by people laughing at the bat, which was obviously a prop of some little fur ball with wings on a string bobbing up and down, and the audience laughing, and it was kind of disappointing and disheartening that an audience couldn't sell out to the beauty of an old film, a film with that kind of power. People couldn't sell out to the film from which the time in which it was made. They were judging it from the perspective of a 21st century audience, and that's sad. That being that, we move on to an acceptance of what people are able to take in when it comes to movie watching, when it comes to love of cinema. The sad fact is that not everybody knows how to watch a film, and I know how pretentious and condescending that sounds, but there is a truth to being able to watch there is a truth and an importance of cinema education. You're not simply watching something for the fun of it. Although there are plenty of films that do that have that kind of quality where it's just like, oh, we're just going to laugh, we're going to have a good time, that's what this is. The truth is that there is art up there on that screen. When we were talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, one of the most disturbing things about the film was how quickly, over the course of, I think, even by the fifth film, the character of Freddy Krueger had become such an embarrassment of obviousness. So instead of the horror and the fear that Craven had fought so artistically, that he had put so much into creating a truly frightening character, subsequent films would dilute that and thus destroy the mythology. But also, and I think we said this in the episode, I think I said it, the brilliance of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the last film of the original series, would not have been possible without the bastardization of the five sequels: Freddy's Revenge, Dream Warriors, Dream Master, Dream Child, Freddy's Dead. If those films hadn't taken it into such an absurd direction, and if they hadn't have betrayed the original idea that Craven had come up with, then the final nightmare, Wes Craven's new nightmare, would not have, it simply would not have worked, because the commentary that he was making was a very powerful one. He was talking about, to a degree, he was talking about the importance of art. The fact of the matter is that the horror film genre is as viable a genre as any film genre that we have, whether it's heavy drama, biographies, biopics, epics, westerns, noir. The horror film as a concept is just as viable. The problem comes in the marketing and how marketing influences the making of the film. So what ends up happening is that you tend to pander to the lowest common denominator. And that's the problem that I've always had with horror films. They just don't work for me in that case, because I feel that they're very condescending. And I know there are a number of people out there who live and die horror, and they love the films that I have a problem with, and I grant you that. You are going to take from the film experience a different thing than what I am going to take, and I can reconcile with that. I can reconcile with. I can find a certain level of just acceptance. You're going to like what you're going to like. I'm going to like what I'm going to like. And between the two shall never meet. It's as simple as that. But it does not mean that I cannot recognize genius when it is there. Tobe Hooper, with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the 180-degree turn that he made 10 years later, or however many years later, for Chainsaw 2. Probably one of the greatest sequels ever made, because it was so... Because, and when we did that episode, go into Libsyn, watch this with Rick Ramos, and just punch in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and those episodes will come up. What was brilliant is that Tobe Hooper knew, I can't beat myself. I cannot do something better than what I've already done. So let me take it in a completely different direction and make something completely different, which he did. Now, is the film as good as the original film? No. But it's not trying to be. It's trying to be something different. Sometimes enough time goes by that when you go back to the original idea, you can look at it from a fresh viewpoint. There was a great deal of trepidation when it was announced that David Gordon Green and Danny McBride would remake or would reboot John Carpenter's original Halloween. That could go fucking sideways so many different ways, and it could have been really bad. Now, the first film, Halloween, the Carpenter film, is a masterpiece. David Gordon Green's follow-up, Halloween, I thought was very good. I really enjoyed it. The second film I thought it was gratuitous, and I thought it was a little bit too... It was violent for violence sake. I've come to a greater appreciation for it at this point because I enjoy it a little bit more. Especially with the final film, Halloween. There was Halloween, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends, and I love the way Halloween Ends played out. And I love the way that that the Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode character eventually comes back and wins out overall. And there was something about it that really resonated with me and made me feel good about the movie watching experience. And I felt like this is a beautiful way to end this story, and I really dug it. That being said, I mean, Romero, Night of the Living Dead. I mean, the Living Dead films are some of the greatest cinema ever created. I don't particularly care for Day of the Dead, but every other film in the series, including Survival of the Dead, which is a film that I didn't particularly care for in my initial viewing, has risen. I think they're all beautiful commentaries on different aspects of our society, whether that be consumerism or the military-industrial complex, class warfare, social media, and then to end it with a good old-fashioned Hatfield and McCoy type struggle. I found fascinating. There's a reason that The Walking Dead was able to last as long as it did, and that was because it followed the template of what Romero had started 50 years earlier. I mean, 40, 50 years, I don't know how many years at this point, but it was brilliant. These are the films that have stuck with me. These are the ones that have really come into my psyche. The De Niro Scorsese collaboration, Scorsese's love of cinema, which led me into discovering Kurosawa, and then, slowly digging deeper into Japanese with Mizoguchi and Ozu, and something that Ibrahim gives me shit about in my embracing of some world cinema and dismissal of others. Well, I don't have a problem with. I thought I had a problem with the French. I don't particularly care for Godard, but Truffaut I love. Bernard Tavernier, Corbeau, Henri Georges Clouzot, the director of Diabolique and Wages of Fear, I love. Alain Delon, that actor I like. I can't remember the name of the guy. Melville, Jean-Pierre Melville. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the world is open to you through cinema. You can travel. And for somebody who doesn't have the money to go to these actual places, there's something about visiting them in the movies that really captures the imagination and fills a certain type of void. I've gone back and forth with people on traveling, and it seems to me that I would have a real problem going to Japan, for instance. My love of Japan is the Shogun era, the period of samurais and samurai warfare and that kind of existence. I would love to have seen that. Modern day Tokyo really doesn't hold a great deal of interest to me, and I don't know. Maybe that's a problem with movie watching, is that you idealize something to a point where it can't be what you imagine it should be. My love of the world is an artificial love based on the movies that I've watched, and that can be very limiting. But it's also an insight to the psyche of what it is that drives you, what it is that makes things run, what it is that fills the tank. Last night I came home from work. I picked up my puppy, and I guess I'm going to post some pictures on Instagram so that you guys can see Jerry Lee and see what he looks like. And he's a small 40-pound bull terrier puppy. He's 6 months old in November. I love this dog. Anyway, I picked him up, and I came home, made a bite to eat, and I decided I wanted to watch something that I was going to be able to talk about as a just a solo thing. And I've talked a little bit about this, where after doing this podcast for so long with Ibrahim, it's a little bit difficult to come at it from a solo aspect, get started, to start talking. But once I do, I feel like the ball starts rolling. I have something to say, and if there's anybody out there that's actually listening, then it's so worth it. One of the concepts, somebody has asked us, a few people have asked us, friends who know the podcast. They ask, why don't you videotape it? Why don't you record it? Why don't you record video along with your audio and post that on YouTube? And there is some validity to that, or the idea of doing that. A lot of people do it. The Joe Rogan Experience does that. Any number of podcasts that are out there have video. But the fact of the matter is that I don't want to do that, because Ibrahim and I have discussed it numerous times. What we do is, in a way, a throwback to AM radio of the late 70s and early 80s. So, ideally, you're listening to this in a dark room late at night. Maybe you have a cigarette, smoldering in an ashtray. You're sipping a beer or a whiskey, and you're listening to our voices, and you're understanding this passion. Where there used to be a time when all you had was the radio, and you used to have to just attune the dial until you found something, and every once in a while you would hear a voice. You would hear a voice out there, and it would come crackling in, and it was Wolfman Jack, or it was some other storyteller giving you insight into their perception of the world, and what the world means to them. And that's all we're doing. It's just giving opinions on films, and sometimes we get into it. I know Ibrahim and I frustrate each other with our choices. He's somebody that likes very avant-garde and experimental cinema. I am not of that liking. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. For the most part, I like narrative, I like structure, I like storytelling and performance. It's what really drives me in film. And when I see that it's not handled as well as it could, or that a film drops the ball, or a film doesn't live up to a reputation, Dario Argento, that experience for me was very disappointing, because I had heard so much about this great Italian filmmaker and giallo filmmaking, and so much of it seemed gratuitous but very simplistic and very obvious. I didn't feel as though there was a great deal invested by the filmmaker in the story that was being told, and subsequently it was very difficult for me to invest in the story that I was watching. There were aspects that I thought worked, but for the most part it was a movie watching experience that greatly disappointed. Now, every once in a while I see something that startles me. I had written off the French. I did not like Godard, in particular, with Breathless. It was a film that just really kind of bored me, and just it seemed pretentious. It seemed very much of an in-your-face, obvious type of storytelling, which isn't fair to Godard or the film, because in a way that's judging the film based on everything that has come after it, and faulting it for the embarrassing films that have come since. So for a great deal of time, I had written off French cinema, and then I saw, with the exception, of course, of film noir, French gangster films, the Melville films, Le Cercle Rouge, Le Samurai, Jules Descends, an American expatriate filmmaker working in France, Rafifi, Bob Le Flambeur. Those films, exceptional films that granted play into the wheelhouse of what I like. So That's that. Um, I finally sat down and I watched Truffaut's The 400 Blows, which knocked me on my ass. It's one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest children, or it's not a children's film, but it's a film about childhood, which is a big difference. There is something there that takes you back, and it humanizes the whole experience, because it 1950s or 19 growing up French, a young French preteen, teenager, whatever, in the 1960s in France, the experience resonates, and you realize that so much of our stories are reflective upon each other. So, me being, a 49-year-old Mexican man growing up in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1980s, the emotional experiences, the sadness, the fear, the disappointment, the the excitement, the interest, you realize that this is something that continues to play a part of who we are regardless of the generation. And I think that was the power of that film, and I'd love to sit down and talk about it. I'm looking forward to seeing Jules the Gem and some of the other films in Truffaut's collection. So it's already about 30 minutes into this episode. What did I come home? What was the original intention of this episode? This episode was to just focus on one film, and here I am going off on this tangent of the movies that have inspired, the movies that have dug into my soul, and for whatever reason, for whatever my take on cinema is, whatever it is that draws me into that dark room, whatever it is that forces me to invest in story, I know that I'm never going to be able to get around that. The hope is that at 49, I'm going to be able to absorb different types of cinema. I was in my mid-30s before I might have been 40 when I first saw a David Lynch film and really understood it. I had seen Blue Velvet and I had dismissed it. And I remember, this is something that Ibrahim and I have talked about. I don't know if he's annoyed by it, but I would be very dismissive of David Lynch, and I would just say, well, that's white people shit. And that's my stock answer to a lot of things. And I still stand by that. David Lynch is a very white filmmaker, but at this age, what I'm understanding is that there is a certain freedom in that. A certain freedom that I am no longer dismissive of white people shit. But I'm also, but I am very, there is a certain level of resentment and jealousy in the understanding that these are the types of filmmakers that can make that kind of dreamlike world and go to the places that a David Lynch goes to in each film. Right now I'm watching the original Twin Peaks series. I think I'm 20 or 21 episodes in. I got about 8 more episodes of the original series. Then I'll watch Fire Walk with Me. Then I'll watch the Showtime Limited reboot, which I'm very excited about. I've heard that in the second or third episode there's a moment that is so Lynchian that it really puts an exclamation mark on his entire career. I'm really excited about what that's going to be. But I think there's a certain evolution in each of us that we go to a place and we discover things that we couldn't see earlier. I've talked numerous times with Ibrahim about Bergman, although I loved The Seventh Seal, and I thought The Virgin Spring was exceptional, and Wild Strawberries really does tap into my fascination with growing old men and growing old. There's something about that really resonates with me. Whether it's Clint Eastwood's Will Money or it's William Holden's Pike Bishop, there's something about regret, sadness, life's reflections, and understanding where something went right, and how it could all go so wrong. I find a great deal of beauty in all of that. I think now I'm ready to start a deep dive into Bergman, and over the next few months, I will be doing just that. And I'm going to be starting with Scenes from a Marriage. Then I'm going to compare that to the HBO series that they did on it, because I really do love Jessica Chastain, and I believe it's Oliver Assayas who's in that film. Maybe not Oliver Assayas, but the guy from Paul Schrader's film. Anyway, we're going to be going into Paul Schrader a little bit. So the preparation that I had in getting this episode ready was, I came home last night and I started to ask myself, had I ever done an episode on Walter Hill's Hard Times, specifically talking about that film, breaking it down, talking about it, really examining what it is about that film that sticks with me all these years later, because I originally saw it when I was a kid, when I was 7 or 8 years old, and it's really interesting that when you reflect on the films that have a certain power over you, you have to do a little bit of digging. You have to scratch beneath that surface. You really have to go into the marrow of a thing to find out where the sustenance is and what it is that has stayed with you, why it is that you go there, why it is that you continue to go back to that well, why you continue to drink from that well. And for me, watching Hard Times, I remember how my dad loved the film. And I remember the fixation that he had. Now, it's nowhere near the obsession that I have with this film, because it didn't come from the same place. I'd have to talk to him about why he loves that film. There's something about Bronson, there's something about Coburn, but for me, as I've gotten older, there's the old man thing, there's the mystery of it, there's a great deal. If you've never seen the film, Charles Bronson plays a drifter named Chaney. No first name, Chaney. Maybe that's his last name, maybe that's his first name. I think it's his last name. But the opening scene is a train coming into the New Orleans stockyards, and he's standing in a boxcar, and he's just looking out. He's purveying the world that he's going into, this city, and he sees it's 1930s, it's the Depression. Everybody has seen Hard Times, and he's looking at a truck with 2 children in it, in the bed of the truck, standing there, and you could, they're little rascals. They're hurting. They're hungry. They're just trying to figure out the next move, and that's what Bronson is. Bronson's trying to figure out the next move. He's trying to figure out what kind of opportunity do I have in this city, and you don't know what it is. You don't know who he is. You don't know where he comes from, and that's a brilliant thing. That's a brilliant way to start off a character if you have that capability, because with the mystery of not knowing a backstory, and you never find out who he really is, you never find out where he's from, and Bronson is one of the few actors that could pull something like that off. Bronson was always better the less he said. He could convey more. People say that he wasn't a good actor. I think he wasn't a great actor when he was speaking, but when he was silent, there was so much that was said with his eyes. There was so much that was said with just the brutality of his face. There was a toughness there, whether it be Hard Times or Once Upon a Time in the West, Sergio Leone's great epic film, a great Western masterpiece, his last great Western. People can say what they want to say about Ducky Sucker or Fistful of Dynamite, but for me, it really is Once Upon a Time in the West. But there's this power in this character because everything is silent. He doesn't have to say much. I have a poster of the film hanging in my gym. My grandfather's old room I turned into a gym, and there's a picture of Bronson with James Coburn behind him. Speed, the character that James Coburn plays, Speed, basically his manager in these bare knuckle fighting competitions, that underground bare knuckle fighting in New Orleans, 1933, I think it is. And the poster says 1933. In those days, words didn't buy much, and that's a perfect description of this film and this story, because there's not a lot to the narrative. It's a very simplistic story. It's not a very simplistic story. It's a very simple story. Man comes into a city looking to make his fortune, or just looking to get ahead, as far ahead as he can get. And he has a talent. He knocks people down. Originally, this film was called The Street Fighter, but Columbia Pictures, the distributor of the film, didn't want it to get confused with the Sonny Chiba film, The Street Fighter, which we talked about in previous episodes. Much different type of film. And I think Hard Times is a much better title. I think it says a lot about the world that it creates. One of the great things about this film is that cinema is one of the powerful things about cinema is the ability that it has to have us look back on us as individuals, the individual audience, the individual person watching the film, the world that we live in. When this film was released in 1975, there was a bit of we were just coming out of Vietnam, Nixon, there was that whole fucking debacle there, Watergate, Cambodia, Laos, all of that. There was this disintegration, there was this feeling of uncertainty and distrust with the government. So you have a film with a quiet, laconic hero that comes into town and is just trying to figure things out. As I watched this film last night, it really... And I've seen this film a couple of dozen times. The films that I really love, I've seen 10, 12, 13 times each. I've seen Goodfellas 20 times. I've seen The Wild Bunch 20 times. I've seen Midnight Run about 100 times. That's not an exaggeration. I've actually seen it about that many times. I watched that film like some people watch Star Wars, or like my sister used to watch The Wizard of Oz when we were growing up. I mean, every day after school, just put the tape in and watch The Wizard of Oz again. That for me was Midnight Run. But you find something in that story that keeps coming back to you. You find something that you identify with, and I certainly identify with this character. Not the fighting aspect, not the level of toughness, but the feeling of having your back up against the wall, the feeling of being unsure of what tomorrow is going to bring and what you bring to it, and maybe becoming outdated, becoming a dinosaur in that aspect. And that's kind of surprising, and it's kind of disheartening. Right now, I'm when this drops, I'll be 49 years old. November 3rd, I will be 49 years old. 1 year away from 50, this monumental age, this period where you have to start wondering, what have I done with my life? And I'm working a job that I throw garbage. I throw garbage. I clean a room. I squeegee the floor. It's lower manual labor. but I feel I'm fortunate to have that job, and not in the sense of, oh God, I'm so happy that I have a job, but in the sense that I'm building something with this company, and I think it'll lead towards a good future. If I have to be in retail, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing, and this is what I need to be giving to it. And I'm getting better at the job every day. But I also come home every night to an empty house. All I have is the dog. All that Chaney has is a cat. There's that sense of loneliness. There's that sense of a loner quality that carries you through that. It might not seem so because I talk so freely on this podcast, but the fact of the matter is I don't see any of you people. So if you're listening, I'm talking to you, but there's a freedom because I don't see you. I don't know you. I'm sharing. But it's not a back and forth thing. It's talking into the night. This is a midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning type of ice cubes clinking in a glass as whiskey is poured over. Although I'm not drinking at this moment, that's the feeling that you're just putting something out there, and if it connects, it connects. When I watch this film, I get that sense of loneliness. I get that sense, and the Bronson character is very much a loner, is very much ill-equipped to deal with people, to deal with a partnership, friendships. His romantic interest is a woman that he meets at a coffee shop, played by Jill Ireland, Bronson's wife. And he can't commit to her. He thinks that just being there should be enough, that paying, that buying things, that it should be the thing that keeps her with him, that makes her see the value in him. And they don't go deep into that story, but Walter Hill's direction and his writing of this story is so sparse and so... There's no fat on this film whatsoever. There's no playfulness in it. It's direct. It's to the point. It's a man film made by men. That's not to say that women can't enjoy this film. My mom loves this film. My mom loves Bronson, and she said there was something so ugly and so manly about him. And it's very interesting that the times have changed to a point where guys like Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, these were the sex symbols. Whereas today you have a Timothy Chalamet and just very effeminate men. It's gone completely different. These are the men that I idealized. These are the men that I idolized. I patterned so much of who I am after these guys. And I know how I think we all do this to a degree. We all look at the thing that we love, that we fall in love with, and we try to become a certain, we adopt certain aspects, and we try to mold ourselves into what we think we're supposed to be. When I first started doing stand-up, when you first start doing stand-up, and I can't speak to everybody, but I can speak to enough comics that I've known and watched, and whose acts I've watched, I find that we pattern ourselves after a comic that makes us laugh. So I was watching George Carlin, Bill Hicks. I was watching that kind of angry comic that could go at a situation, that could have a problem with something. The problem in going that direction for me, at 5'11", which is really tall for a Mexican, but 5'11", 260 pounds, I'm too big to be the angry comic. When I first heard Paul Mooney, I heard somebody who was very angry, and I thought to myself, well, how the hell was it that he was able to pull this off? When I finally saw him actually perform at the Comedy Store, I immediately understood, because there was a smile about it. You could have all this anger and bitterness, and you could say all these things that were they're very pointed and very they could be heard as offensive. They could be in your face, very difficult for an audience to absorb. But Mooney did it with a playfulness. Mooney did it with a smile. I tried the smile for a while. It didn't really work for me. So what I slowly ended up doing was shifting from smiling like Mooney, trying to get away from the charm because I didn't have that, towards playing with the anger and shifting into a level of frustration. The frustration made it possible to sell the anger. I was the last sane man in an insane world. And you find that in the movies as well. When you are the pillar of sanity, which I realize how fucked up that is for me, but it was the thing that helps you get through it. When I watch Hard Times, I see a little bit of that in Chaney. Everybody else is grandiose. Everybody else wants. You have speed. James Coburn, magnificent performance. Talkative, a con man to a degree, a certain level of charm, a bullshit artist, even when he finds himself in over his head, all he knows how to do is to fuck with the people that he's in debt to. At some point he knows when to shut up. At other points, all he's doing is doubling down. All he's doing is knowing that he knows that he has to continue to move forward, and he has to continue being that voice. His girlfriend, frustrated by his childishness, his inability to manage money, his gambling addiction to a degree, You have Strother Martin's Poe, the cut man, a hophead, an opium addict. A sweet, loving performance, a very sweet performance that Strother Martin was capable of. I mean, Strother Martin was really one of the great character actors in a role that I find very just overwhelming. I don't know anybody else who could have played that level of sensitivity that he brings to it, a somewhat effeminate performance, but one that I really can't imagine anybody else of that time period being able to pull off in quite the manner that he did. Jill Ireland, who there was some friction on the set with that, and Walter Hill's decision to cut most of her scenes made it, it caused a rift between he and Bronson. I would have loved to have seen those two work together again, and unfortunately they never did. So she's very good as a woman who wants commitment and is looking for her best out. And she's very good in the portrayal of her interest in the Chaney character, but also in her desire to be more than just a stock. And I say this in the life aspect of it, in the real life storytelling. A lot of us can be A lot of us can be simply characters in other people's stories. That's not what we want. We want to be elevated. And that's what she wants, and she portrays it beautifully. Robert Tessier, that bald-headed fucking character, just beautiful. I love him in this film. Nick Dimitri as the second fighter that they bring in to beat Chaney. I got a chance to listen. Walter Hill came to the American Cinematheque at the Aero Theater in Santa Monica. I don't know when it was, 2014 maybe. And this film was playing on a double feature. I don't know what was the second film, but it was Hard Times and something else. And Walter Hill came in to speak. And I remember he was talking about Bronson. He was talking about what Bronson brought to the role. And he said, the problem with Bronson was he couldn't, because he was a smoker, he didn't have the stamina to last very long in those fights. He could only do he would maybe 30 or 40 seconds of a fight. But the fact of the matter is that he would beat the shit out of anybody in those 30 or 40 seconds. So the fight scenes were like dances. And people had asked, why wasn't there more blood? He was like, well, blood would have taken it into a different direction. For these guys beating the shit out of each other the way they do in all of the fights, there's about 4, maybe 5 fights. There should have been busted eyes. There should have been cuts. There should have been crimson, especially bare knuckles, busted hands. And there's not. And I think it was a smart move on Walter Hill's part, because that would have taken it out of this weird kind of fantasy world that the film kind of exists in, because it's a bookmark of the past. It's this beautifully told story about days gone by, days of yesteryear. And I love that. I got a chance to ask him a question. I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast that we did talk. We talked a little bit about Walter Hill in a podcast from that time period. I think it was right after I went to that screening. But there's a moment where, as the story plays out, Speed and Chaney become the big. Chaney proves himself. Nobody can beat him. He's that tough. He's that good. And the character that Michael McGuire, I think is his name, Chick Gandil, which I love, because that's, if I'm not mistaken, that's the name of the mobster who organized the 1919 World Series White Sox scandal. So he needs to have the toughest guy. He needs to manage the toughest guy in the city. And after Bronson puts down his man, Robert Tessier, in his cage fight, which is one of the best fights, probably the best fight in the film, my favorite. And Tessier is just wonderful. That great bald head of his, and this kind of being in over his head and unsure of what he's going up against. I love that moment. Anyway, there is the fight. Gandil gets a new fighter. He imports a guy from Chicago named Street, played by Nick Dimitri, an actor I'd only seen in one other film as a mobster in a Richard Pryor film called Bustin' Loose. Fun, really good movie, really good time. He brings in this fighter from Chicago, and Bronson and he go at it. They beat the shit out of each other, and it's a good fight. But Bronson puts them down. And I'm assuming everybody who's listening to this right now has seen this film, so I'm not giving anything away. It's not like there's a great deal of spoilers in this thing, but there's this moment where the fighter is on the ground Bronson's Chaney has put him down. The fight's coming to an end. The guy is tired. He's beaten. He doesn't have a lot left. And Robert Tessier reaches into his pocket and pulls out a couple of steel rods. They put him on the ground, and Chick Gandil says, "Use them. Use them." And Hill cuts to a shot of Bronson, and he's looking at it, and then you could see this level of fear in his eyes. Coburn goes crazy, like, foul, get those fucking Palmers out of here. He doesn't say fucking, get those Palmers out of here, you foul, goddammit. And Chick Gandil's like, use them. And there's a level of just contempt. This is your guy, you should be protecting him. You know, if he loses, he loses. That's what happens. The fight is not a guaranteed thing. But in that shot of Bronson looking and seeing that, there's palpable fear there. And I asked Walter Hill, and he didn't give me a satisfactory answer, and I don't know if it's because he couldn't remember it, or I remember it not being a satisfactory answer, and it doesn't really matter because there's a certain mystery that happens in a film that you don't have to know everything. But there's this look that Bronson gives where there's fear. And it's that moment where it's like, oh my God, this is very dangerous. Am I going to have to kill this man? Am I going to have to walk away from this thing because I can't kill him? I can't physically beat him to death. Dimitri, as Street, sees these Palmers and gets upset, and he smacks them out of the way, and he gets up and he continues to fight. And there's a nobility to that. There's a beauty in that. There's an understanding that fuck these promoters, fuck these Don King, lizard-like, snake fucking evil bastards. This is about me and him. And that's one of the things that really goes back to where I keep going back to, where I see this film and I think to myself, you have to prove something to yourself. I think that's the brilliance of this film. I think that's the thing that really has me coming back to it time and time again, where I start to understand exactly what it is that is driving the plot. It's a very human film. It understands the characters, and Hill directs the film with an understanding of who his characters are. Speed is loudmouth. Speed is a braggart. It's a great deal of braggadocio there. The women in their lives serve a certain purpose. Poe, somewhat of a voice of reason, somewhat of an in-between. If you watch the film, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Chick Gandil, this character that is so consumed by his own greatness, that is so consumed by his own success, his manipulation of this city. And it's one of the great moments where Coburn, mouthy as he is, goes up to him, and they're going to make that final bet where Chaney is betting everything he has, $5,000, to get his friend out of the situation that he's found himself in. After borrowing so much money, losing money at the tables, James Coburn goes over to Gandil to give him the money to hold. And he looks at him and he says, "That's the thing about you, Chick. You're always going to smell like fish." He's letting him know that no matter how much success he has, this is obvious, but I just love to say it. No matter how much success, no matter how great he believes himself to be, no matter what kind of wealth he has, he's always going to be nothing more than a fishmonger. You're new money. You're no class. You're no better than me. You just played the game a little bit better. That's all. Chaney goes on, and it's obvious how it ends. They collect their money, and they're off. And it ends where it begins. They're back at the stockyards. They're back with the trains. And there's this glimmer of hope that it's not going to end the way it's going to end for Coburn, for Speed. Maybe we can continue this partnership. Maybe we can continue where we're going. And Bronson's Chaney is just like, north. He's asked, what are you going to do? Where are you going? He says, north. He gives the guy some money. He gives Poe some money. You know, I got a cat. Take care of it. Poe says, that's a lot of money. It's such a wonderful little moment. It's a very human film. It's about how times are tough. It's about what we need to do in order to survive the hard times. It's about discovering your own worth and being able to push forward with that understanding, with that knowledge. And it doesn't matter that I'm 49 years old and I'm throwing garbage and I'm compacting cardboard and then I'm squeegeeing a blood-soaked floor. I'm still in the game. I'm still hustling. I'm still fighting. I'm still trying to get through it. That doesn't change. I love that. I love that about when you see a film and you see characters who not only refuse to give up, they're incapable of giving up. They can't. It puts a little fire in your belly. It's a little bit of an ember that continues to keep you moving forward. That's all we got. To keep moving forward. So, however the year plays out, whatever happens, we're just going to be playing this game. I'm not going anywhere. I love doing this show. This has been a fun episode, and I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I'm glad I did it. I want to say thank you to those people, to those of you who are contributing on the buymeacoffee.com/watch Rick Ramos page. Jorge Salcedo loved the Elm Street episode. Thanks us. He bought 2 coffees. Stephen Palmer bought 2 coffees. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Tommy Tickle from the UK. Hey, I love my American listeners, but you got to understand, there is something about being a hometown Arizona boy and knowing that somebody in the UK or the United Arab Emirates or Ireland or Slovakia or fucking Italy or Indonesia, to know that those people are listening, Finland, Newfoundland, the Netherlands, there's something that is very... I love everybody that is listening. I appreciate your support. But knowing that we're international, there's a little bit of a... I gotta be honest, there's a little bit of a thrill that goes with that. Tommy Tickle, out of the UK, thank you. Thanks for the real... He says, thanks for the real passion and love you both put into the pod. Love your work, lads. UK love with an OK sign. Well, thank you, brother. Thank you. Charles Mahoney. We thank you, Mr. Mahoney. I can't say enough. I speak from the heart when I say that this is a passion. This is something that we love. This is something that we just continue to do because there's a certain validation you guys listening and giving thanks, we appreciate that. So, for the rest of you, I want to say thank you to those who donate. If you're listening, if you enjoy what we do, if you want to continue hearing what we do, please go to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos and donate. We got the holidays coming up. All we're trying to do is keep the fucking lights on, okay? You can see what's donating. All we're trying to do is, we're not getting rich. We're not getting famous. We're just a couple of guys with a passion. You cheap bastards out there can help that out. Dig in and be grateful. We're grateful to you. Thank you very much for listening. Next week, this will be Friday, my birthday. Sunday, you'll hear our opinions on Martin Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon, followed by Sean Penn's The Pledge, Akira Kurosawa's High and Low, and ending November with Richard Pryor live in concert and Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip. Thank you very much. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.